Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm John Lovett.
I'm Tommy Vitor.
Later in the pod, we have Tommy's interview with veterans advocate and host of the podcast Angry Americans, Paul Rykov. But first, we're going to talk about the Democratic and Republican strategy ahead of this week's public impeachment hearings and the latest twist in the 2020 campaign, which is Michael Bloomberg's potential entry into the race. Also, for the first hearing on Wednesday, a few of us here at Crooked Media will be slacking live in the old group thread. I know I wrote that out last night, and I was like, slacking live group thread. What has happened?
You know that thing you use at work that you hate? We'll be doing that publicly.
But anyway, we have fun doing it during the debates, and now we're gonna have some of your favorite Crooked Media characters doing it for the impeachment hearings on Wednesday.
Follow along with us.
You can watch at youtube.com/Crooked Media, and you can also check out our brand new impeachment frequently asked questions at crooked.com/impeachment. You can also you can also subscribe to Brian Beutler's podcast called Rubicon.
Great episode this week.
Great episode this week.
So
It really was.
You
So
know,
good.
Seriously.
all the impeachment all the impeachment news that you could possibly need right here at Crooked Media. Tommy, you've got some exciting news.
Oh, yeah. I was like, what are you talking about? Yes. How do we pick this up? I do, John. What you're missing is me forgetting what my news was. So, okay. You guys might have noticed I've been going to Iowa fairly regularly over the last couple months. It's not just because I am obsessed with the place and reliving glory days. It's because I've been working with Pineapple Street Media on a limited series about the Iowa caucuses. We want to talk about why the Iowa caucuses are first, how the rules work, how you do well there, and like, really, is this a good way to pick a president? So the first episode comes out on the 19th. We'll release one per week for 4 weeks, and then we got kind of a floating fifth that's going to show up sometime in January, I think. But I'm very excited about this. It's been incredibly fun to be hanging out in Iowa, and not just like with candidates, but with the young field staffers who are the heart and soul of these campaigns, who are just inspiring people. Whenever politics is depressing, you can talk to these folks and get, just remember why we all do this. So I hope you enjoy it.
I am so excited to hear this.
Coming out on Tuesdays.
You sent us the trailer, which I guess is going out this week too.
Yes.
And just listening to the trailer, I got really excited for the pod.
And it's going to be in the Pod Save America feed.
It'll be in the Pod Save America feed. You don't have to subscribe to anything else. You just have to listen to something new on Tuesdays.
That's pretty easy, guys.
That's pretty easy.
Awesome. Love it.
Right.
How's the show?
So great. Great Love It or Leave It with Cal Penn, Emily Heller, and Jason Leopold from BuzzFeed, who walked us through the documents he uncovered from the Mueller report and how they relate to what's happening in Ukraine, specifically the fact that it may be that Paul Manafort is the person who told Donald Trump first about the idea of a Ukraine conspiracy.
Jason Leopold is one of those reporters who, like, you don't know what he does for months at a time, and then he's just like, ha!
He got
a million documents.
Really interesting. And some great rants from Cal and Emily. It was a great episode.
Perfect. All right, let's get to the news. This week, the House of Representatives will hold the first public hearings to help determine whether they will impeach Donald Trump. On Wednesday, former acting ambassador to Ukraine, Bill Taylor, and State Department official George Kent will testify. And on Friday, former ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, will testify. Is it Yovanovitch? Yovanovitch. What's that? Yovanovitch, yeah. And on Friday, former ambassador to Ukraine, Marie Yovanovitch, will testify. House Intelligence Committee Chairman Adam Schiff will lead the hearings, which he set up to allow for 45 minutes of sustained questioning by Schiff, Republican Devin Nunes, and their staff lawyers, as opposed to the 5-minute rounds of questioning we're used to in these hearings.
What a delight that
thank
is.
God.
That are annoying.
Thank you, guys.
It's really... Love the format change. Love what they're doing this season.
Me too.
Guys, why do you think Democrats chose Taylor, Kent, and Yovanovitch to go first?
I think it's pretty simple. Taylor specifically kept copious notes, has unimpeachable personal credentials, and is going to help lay out the story that Democrats want to tell.
Yeah,
Totally.
I think that when you look at the character of someone like Bill Taylor, right? He is a State Department official. He also served in the U.S. Army. He served in Vietnam. He worked at the Department of Defense. He's probably a Republican. And he can speak to the fact that his clear understanding was that the security assistance money that had been given by Congress to Ukraine for their national defense was held up as part of a quid pro quo by the Trump administration. So I'm like, this is devastating testimony.
Yeah, and I think the important thing here, because, and we're going to talk about this in a second, Republicans have signaled that one of their big arguments is going to be, it's all hearsay, it's all second or third or fourth hand. Well, Taylor's testimony is based on what he heard directly from Gordon Sondland. Gordon Sondland's revised testimony is now in line with Bill Taylor's. Before it was in conflict with Taylor's. And after Taylor spoke and testified behind closed doors, Sondland then revised his testimony. So this whole bullshit that Taylor, did not talk directly to President Trump is just that, because Gordon Sondland talked directly to President Trump, and now Gordon Sondland's testimony is in line with Bill Taylor's.
And here's how Sondland explained it to Taylor. Quote, "When a businessman is about to sign a check to someone who owes him something, the businessman asks that person to pay up before signing the check. Thank you for that helpful explanation, Gordon."
Yeah. No, I think
Moron.
I think these three witnesses, and look, and from Yovanovitch, on Friday, we're going to hear about how she was basically pushed out of her post because of conspiracy theories cooked up by Rudy Giuliani and folks at Fox News, and I think that's going to be, and like people said that have heard her testify behind closed doors already, that her testimony is particularly emotional because she is this sort of long-standing, nonpartisan bureaucrat who who's served the country well under both Democratic and Republican administrations, pushed out of her job because she refused to go along with an extortion scheme.
It's also just worth noting that one of the 35,000, spin explanations the Trump administration is trying is that he just cares so much about corruption, so he held up this money. She will be able to talk about the fact that what Trump and Rudy Giuliani and Gordon Sondland were doing in Ukraine was actually incredibly harmful to any efforts to root out corruption in Ukraine. I don't think it's like the key thing that's going to influence voters in the U.S., but it's just, these bullshit arguments they stand up, we knock down one by one, and she will do that powerfully here.
I think George Kent will do that too.
The corruption argument is obviously silly on its face. The simple question you could ask is, what's another example of corruption that Donald Trump has ever shown any interest in stopping?
Literally one example.
One example. Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of other explanations. I mean, the other thing, too, is first they had this hearsay argument, right? Because, Bill Taylor never spoke directly with Trump. But, of course, now we have Sondland revising his testimony and basically completely reversing himself. And he was in direct contact with Trump. And so I guess they're left with this position of Gordon Sondland as some kind of mastermind pulling all the strings behind the scenes. But, of course, that doesn't work because he's getting his guidance from Rudy. And where's Rudy getting his guidance from? One thing we know about Rudy Giuliani is he is very interested in defending Donald Trump. He is also, his cat whiskers, they're very sensitive. They're catching doors on either side of him. And the second he feels any hint that he's being hung out to dry, the second there is any hint he feels like he is being hung out to dry, he is on Laura Ingraham with a fucking iPad, rolling through crazy criminal texts every time.
Yes.
Well, it also doesn't matter what Rudy Giuliani decides to do, because in the call summary, we all see that Donald Trump said specifically, do us a favor, blah, 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 asked for the favors, and then said, contact my lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, to figure it all out. I mean, it's just...
The efforts to get some distance between Trump and Rudy are amazing. I also think that maybe it was Lindsey Graham who started floating the Gordon Sondland is a secret Democratic plant argument.
In cahoots.
Yeah, so
he called him, except he called him Sonderland multiple times.
Yeah, so Gordon Sondland gave Donald Trump's inauguration $1 million as part of a long play for the Democratic Party to do this whole scheme.
Well, we should.
Conspiracies run deep.
Yeah, you should attack. You can. So obviously that's silly, but you can also attack it more specifically because what Graham is saying is, so Gordon Sondland issued his testimony that was good for Trump. Then Gordon Sondland starts to become quite fearful that he has perjured himself in a way that could lead to a referral to the Justice Department, and so he revises his testimony. And what Lindsey Graham is, I would call it insinuating, except he's just basically saying it out loud, is that, the only reason Gordon Sondland must have done that is he was working with the Democrats to come up with a damning testimony to kind of get out of such a referral. And of course, there's no evidence for that. It's just like Lindsey Graham wakes up every morning just trying to get to the end of the day.
Full of shit.
So a Democratic leadership aide told CNN, quote, the first hour of a hearing and the first hearing has got to be a blockbuster. Do you guys agree with that?
Can we try something new here, Democrats? Let's try something called lowering expectations. Right? You're not pitching a fucking Jason Statham movie, right? Like, here are two things we should do. The facts that we already know are blockbuster. Let's get them repeated on TV by credible people. as a way of helping inform the rest of the country. 2, the standard for impeachment is not a criminal act. So let's not get sucked down that rabbit hole and make it clear that an abuse of power or helping to rig the next election is actually an impeachable offense. Those are the 2 big picture priorities I would love to see, which I have a full list after that.
Yeah, that Axios interview is very funny. It very much seemed like that aide did a line of coke and then pitched Knight Rider in the 80s. It was very very much oh man, it's gonna touch your fucking soul. All right, first boom, you got Bill Taylor, but then don't worry, we're coming for your heartstrings with Yovanovitch, and then once that's done, the big finish. Kent's gonna come in with some third act fucking surprises.
George Kent's gonna save the cat.
It's unbelievable. But anyway.
Don't talk to reporters.
It was this is all just fun.
Stop.
John, that's good advice.
Just stop talking to reporters.
I just enjoy it. It's very silly. But it was
But also,
too much.
look, I mean, part of the reason this blockbuster thing matters, unfortunately, is the primary goal of these impeachment hearings is to communicate the gravity of Trump's abuse of power and the overwhelming evidence directly to the American people, of course. But we also know that probably most people won't be watching these, and they will understand what has happened in these hearings through the filter of the media. And I think over the last couple of days, I started getting a little more anxious than usual that the media is going to fuck this one up.
Well, yeah.
And for a few reasons, and the blockbuster thing speaks to it. One is there is this need for what is new, right? What is new from these hearings? Like the smoking gun happened a couple weeks ago now, right? We already know from when all these witnesses first testified behind closed doors. First, there were leaks. That was like the bombshells and explosive leaks and all this kind of stuff. Then we all saw the depositions last week. They were less newsy last week, so they weren't as big of a deal. And now the question is, will the public hearing, if the expectation is that these are only successful if a bunch of witnesses sort of talk about a whole bunch of new information, then they're not going to be successful.
Trump's not going to run in and say, you can't handle the code red. You can't handle the truth or whatever. It's ridiculous.
I think that's a fair thing to be worried about. I do think that Schiff has been smart. And the articulation of kind of 3 broad principles for what they're examining is really smart.
He's basically laid out 3 questions that everything needs to, he's basically laid out 3 questions here that they're going to be asking, and he told the Republicans, I'm not going to accept witnesses that don't abide by these 3 questions or don't have to do with anything. 1 is, did Trump request an investigation of his political rival from a foreign government? 2 is, did he use his powers to pressure a foreign government to do this? And 3 is, did he try to cover it up?
Right.
Basically.
So it's very simple. Did he solicit foreign interference? Did he try to pressure people to do it? And did he try to cover it up? Very simple, very important. And I think setting those as the kind of framing questions will allow us to see the Taylor testimony and the other testimonies that follow as did they meet that threshold of answering those questions? And I think he set it up so that the answer will be yes.
Yeah. I would like a couple things. 1, I just want them to make this story as simple as possible. Let's not get wrapped around the axle about what a quid pro quo is or the legalities. Speak English, tell people why this matters. 2, just don't get sucked into any GOP theatrics. Matt Gaetz might paint his chest and shotgun a beer. Just ignore him. 3, I think it's clear that Republicans are circling around an argument that says, 1, the whistleblower is part of the deep state and being hidden, and 2, all this information is hearsay. We can't prove intent, right? We don't know what Donald Trump really thought. I'd like to hear them preempt that argument, not by downplaying the testimony we have, but saying, okay, if you want to talk about the president's intent, can we make Mulvaney or Bolton or Mike Pompeo available? Because they clearly have spoken to Donald Trump about this. Some of them were on this phone call. So let's hear from them. Why are you hiding them? I think the cover-up here is evidence of a crime to the American people. And then last thing, to your point, John, about the media filter, the Democrats need a digital messaging plan, right? The Trump war room and Trump's Twitter feed are going to be blasting every good clip for them that ever happens. We need to be fighting that battle and not just going through the CNN pundit class.
Yes, because guaranteed Republicans are going to succeed on this front. When Jim Jordan goes out there and starts screaming about whatever and, accuses Bill Taylor, maybe you were the one who interfered in the 2016 election, the media will report that as, well, the Republicans did get a few hits in because they caught Bill Taylor off guard by mentioning some crazy fucking conspiracy theory that he'd never heard of until now, right? That kind of stuff will happen. And so I think you're right that Democrats need a messaging machine here and need to be on offense because we cannot count
Mm-hmm.
on legacy media to do what we need to do here.
I also think too, like there's the circus. They're going to try to do the circus thing that we can kind of expect, and then I also think a significant way in which they will try to create moments that undermine the premise of these hearings is we will see a lot of, so you can't say for certain.
Yeah.
We're all here. We're all gathered here. They got the press corps in the back. They've got lawyers.
You've never spoken to Donald Trump.
And you're going to have us believe we should impeach the president, having you never even spoken to the man.
They want a Brett Kavanaugh, Lindsey Graham temper tantrum.
They've said it. Yeah, they said that the Brett Kavanaugh hearings
They're
are a model.
fucking casting for it. They're casting for it. They're like, Devin Nunes isn't right for the part. We need Jim Jordan.
Jim Jordan. Imagine bringing in Jim Jordan this week when another person came forward to say that he did not disclose information about sexual abuse on the OSU wrestling team. Oh my God.
It's ride or die.
Unbelievable.
They just don't.
Care.
No, but you're right. I did like in that same Axios story that someone involved in the preparation said that Schiff has been telling all the members of the committee to be serious as fuck.
Yeah, I like that too.
Which I think is great. Like, I think there's going to be all these antics. The Republicans are going to bring the circus, and Democrats not getting caught up in their circus, not arguing back and forth with them, just being very calm. And the other thing you said, Tommy, that I completely agree with and really hope that Schiff does in his opening statement is we now know the arguments that the Republicans are going to make because they've telegraphed them to everyone. Rebut them in the opening statement.
Mm-hmm.
You know, rebut some of the, like, I think that is such a smart thing to do. You're going to hear this. I mean, lawyers do this, right?
No, for sure.
You're going to hear this argument. You're going to hear this argument. You're going to hear this argument. This is why all of these are wrong. So I think that's super important to do.
And call Nellie or early. It's very important. Just kidding. It's a thing that they want to do.
And Andrea Chalupa, right?
Yeah.
She was on the witness list too.
She cooked this whole thing up.
Random DNC staffer that they, I mean, we're laughing about it in the right-wing world. They think actually she's like she's the cause of all the interference in the 2016 election. Go look it up. Or don't. They actually don't. One last thing on Democratic strategy. Two potentially devastating witnesses who will not be testifying as of now are former National Security Advisor John Bolton and White House Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney, who are waiting for a court to rule whether they should obey a subpoena from Congress or an order from the White House to defy the subpoena from Congress. Because it could take weeks or even months for that ruling, Democrats have decided to forge ahead without these witnesses. Think this is the right strategy?
I don't feel like I could really articulate. I don't feel like I feel strongly about an alternative path here. Like I agree with pursuing the subpoenas through the courts. We've talked about this a lot. The fact that there is inherent power in the Constitution for Congress to not only issue subpoenas but enforce those subpoenas. I believe in that power. I'm also very skeptical that it would be politically advantageous for Democrats to use it. I wish I lived in a world where a few years ago there was a kind of hypothetical conversation amongst Democrats and Republicans, and there was a consensus built to reestablish congressional prerogatives, and there was a bill passed that said these are the steps by which you can enforce a congressional subpoena. But those rules don't exist, which means any attempt to enforce them right now will be seen as partisan. And so I don't see a better path.
I don't know a better path either, but it really bothers me that they might not testify.
Yeah.
Because we saw this with Mueller. The fact that Donald Trump could do written questions and was never pressed on obstruction really helped their case. I mean, the cover-up is ongoing as far as I'm concerned. And I think, you're seeing someone like Lindsey Graham, again, shameless lying idiot, say that the Trump policy was too incoherent to have been some sort of quid pro quo or extortion racket, right? They said the same shit about Donald Trump Jr. during the campaign, that he was too stupid and didn't understand campaign finance laws and thus couldn't have broken them. And it's absurd on its face. And so, again, what we're hearing these guys talk about is Donald Trump's intent. And now I think that that's a dangerous road for us to go down generally, because we're talking in terms of a criminal statute already, and that's not the bar. That's not the threshold you need to make in an impeachment inquiry. It's high crimes and misdemeanors does not require it to be a crime. But then we are foreclosing our chance to interview people like Mulvaney and Pompeo and Bolton who understand the president's mindset because they probably had conversations with him. So that bothers me a lot.
This is where I'm conflicted because, so what do you want out of John Bolton and Mick Mulvaney? Well, for Mick Mulvaney, he's the guy because he is acting chief of staff and still the director of the Office of Management and Budget. He's the guy that ordered the freeze on the aid, right? And everyone else in the government, the State Department, the Defense Department. None of them wanted a freeze on the aid. So clearly it came from Donald Trump and OMB. And so Mick Mulvaney will be able to talk about, and so would his aides at OMB, why the aid was frozen, when it was frozen, what Donald Trump said, all that bullshit. John Bolton, his lawyer, has said in a letter last week he knows about, quote, many relevant meetings and conversations. So John Bolton is playing. John Bolton is playing some kind of a game.
That's what I was going to raise too. So that is a really interesting. Bolton has been very hard to pin down through all of this, but that is such a strange thing for his lawyer to hint at. The other piece of it with Bolton too is, based on news reports, he was afraid of Trump getting on the phone with Zelensky because he thought the call would be a disaster, and then it was. Why did you think the call would be a disaster?
Well, so my point is, though, like what you were saying, Tommy, if we wait for the court to rule, then the sort of media narrative becomes a little bit more about intent. The Democrats need these witnesses because they feel like they need to prove Donald Trump's intent. And then if the court rules that they don't have to testify, suddenly it's, oh, Democrats didn't get the witnesses they need. So I worry about that. On the other hand, you're right. Like, them testifying would be extremely devastating. But I don't think we need them to prove that Donald Trump clearly knew what the fuck he was doing, clearly was targeting his political opponent.
Yeah, he said call Rudy in the transcript, right? I mean, that should be all we need. That said, like, I don't think John Bolton is ready to go down with the ship. And I think Mick Mulvaney is an arrogant ass who's as terrible as Trump and will undoubtedly do whatever it takes to cover his own ass. And I really would love to see them testify.
We also might get news reports anyway. Like, John Bolton might decide that he doesn't want to testify, but he just wants to, say it in his book.
Yeah, I also just sort of like what are the alternatives here? It's
waiting.
It's waiting, or it's sending out fucking Steny Hoyer with a pair of handcuffs, and like I don't.
But like Mulvaney,
I don't even know if that.
But how do you assert privilege over Mulvaney when he went and did like a 40-minute press conference at the podium about all the relevant facts, and he admitted to a quid pro quo?
Which is apparently why Bolton's people are pissed that Mulvaney joined the lawsuit, because they think that Bolton has a legitimate reason not to testify, which he's a national security aide and had privileged conversations with Donald Trump, which is also why I think it's hard to do the inherent contempt there too. So there was also news from the New York Times over the weekend about another Ukraine drug deal co-conspirator. Rudy Giuliani's indicted client, Lev Parnas, the co-founder of Fraud Guarantee, is preparing to tell impeachment investigators that, at Rudy's direction, he met with Ukraine President Zelensky's top aide last May in Kiev to tell him that unless they announced an investigation into Joe Biden, Mike Pence wouldn't be attending Zelensky's inauguration, and the U.S. would freeze military aid. They didn't announce the investigation. Mike Pence didn't go to the inauguration, and the military aid was frozen. Giuliani and Parnas' fraud guarantee partner, Igor Fruman, who was also at the meeting, denied that this happened. How much does this matter, and should Democrats wait for Parnas to testify?
I will say only this. I do not believe Donald Trump will enjoy his impeachment proceedings being on television, but I will say the one day that will be his favorite is the day that Mike Pence is implicated. That will be the day he enjoys it the most.
It's just, this is so frustrating. Has there ever been a more open and shut
That's what I'm saying. I know.
Case of fraud? What are we doing here? We're all talking about who should testify. There's like 14 star witnesses here that we're going to hear from. Also, this is an aside. Prime Minister Erdogan is coming to the White House on Wednesday for a meeting right after his ethnic cleansing got over with, and Trump is going to hold a press conference with him. What the fuck?
It's you're right though. It's I as we were preparing for this today, I'm like, it's such an open and shut case, and the story of this impeachment is a story about Donald Trump and the Republican Party and what the Republican Party is willing to tolerate. It's not about anything else. It's not about whether Democrats are successful in holding the right hearings or getting this out. The evidence is all there. And if Republicans, all of them, decide to protect Donald Trump and say that it's okay for foreign governments to interfere in our elections from now on, then that's what that's what the American people should know and go vote on.
Yeah,
that's it. That's all this is about.
It's how much evidence do you need to how much evidence fuel is required to get fire from the dwindling little bit of spark left in the tiny bits of shame inside of the Republican coalition. Like how many fucking barrels of TNT, nitroglycerin, and gasoline do you need to get and billows to get fire from these people?
It is useful. It is useful to see finally even though we've known for a long time, for most of them, who all of these Republicans are, right?
Yeah.
I keep thinking back to, Elizabeth Warren's answer in one of the town halls when she came out for impeachment, and she's like, I don't know that we're going to get him out of office, but these people should be on the record. Every single person who's been elected to office should be on the record, and that's it. Like, or people who are in office, like, glad we all know what Nikki Haley's all about after this weekend.
Nikki Haley, the dance she is trying to do, where she's trying to be on Donald Trump's side by attacking the people that came to her and said, we think he's dangerously unfit for office. Her response to that was, ooh, let's scribble down some notes from my book, because that'll play well on the mainstream media, and it'll play well with Trump because I want him to like me because I'm going to run for president. Give me a fucking break.
Yeah, she's, it's pretty, hey, Nikki Haley.
It's so obvious.
We get what you're doing. You're not hiding it well.
I also just
You're not hiding it as well as you think you are.
the you can't punish someone for an attempted crime is truly the Sideshow Bob defense. You don't get a Nobel Prize for attempted chemistry.
I can't believe Nikki Haley used that.
Amazing.
You thought that people thought that she was a serious person, and she's using the attempted crime defense.
And did she also trot out the impeachment as the death penalty?
Yes, she did.
It's not. It's being fired.
Honestly, the death penalty is the death penalty.
Yeah, we still have that. The death penalty is the death penalty.
Yeah.
It's actually also in the Constitution under treason.
It also is very revealing your relationship to power and what you think about power, that you think that losing it is the death penalty. Very revealing about how Nikki Haley sees the world. Very revealing. All right, let's talk about the Republican strategy, which as of this recording, is based on the argument that, according to all the publicly available evidence, Trump did nothing wrong. That's basically what it is. Sorry. And all the witnesses who testified that Trump did do something wrong don't have firsthand knowledge of what happened, which was just, the normal foreign policy of a president who's passionately opposed to corruption.
And who's constantly telling people to call his personal lawyer.
Right. Even he's always passionately opposed to corruption, even if that corruption happens to involve one of his potential opponents in 2020. That was the new one over some of them. John Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana, on the Sunday shows. Well, there's a difference. Like, yeah, he cares about corruption, and it would be bad if he targeted corruption because it was his political opponent. But what if the corruption just involves someone who happens to be his political opponent?
You see what they're doing. What they're basically saying is you will be unable through the record be able to prove the opposite, right? It is very hard to show that Donald Trump was going after Burisma because he cared about corruption versus he was going after corruption because he cared about Burisma. That's their theory, that it's hard to make that distinction from the record of Trump's conduct.
And that is just very silly because it is very easy. It is very easy to show that he targeted that company purely because of Joe Biden. And one reason it's easy is he and Rudy Giuliani have been telling us that he wanted to investigate the Bidens for months. Anyway, so to that end, the Republicans asked to call witnesses like Hunter Biden, a bunch of characters that star in right-wing conspiracy theories about who really interfered in 2016, and the whistleblower himself, all of which were quickly rejected by Adam Schiff, which he has the power to do. Guys, what else does that list of witnesses tell you about the Republican strategy for these hearings? What was your reaction to the witness list? And
I think they're following, the kind of Hugh Hewitt guidance, which is if this is about a specific set of criminal acts around Ukraine, it looks very, very bad. If we can turn this into a circus about Ukraine, 2016, Russia, Mueller, DNC,
Nellie Orr,
whatever you want. If we can get
Jim Comey, Lisa Page.
Throw everything into the pot.
Their standard is basically that the only people who can speak honestly about anything are right-wing Republicans that support Donald Trump.
That is the standard.
Right?
That is the standard.
So Donald Trump, the hard thing for Republicans is Trump will only accept you as on his team if you say the call was perfect, he did nothing wrong. Like, that's the standard he wants.
He asked for that last night again.
On Twitter. The Republicans generally, I think, are going to do what they've been doing forever, which is try to figure out all the partisan leanings of the whistleblower or anyone else involved and attack their character, call them partisan, find some bullshit thing to just hang their defense on and go from there. And then generally, even the most reasonable Republicans, like the Will Hurds of the world, who are like generally reasonable people, are just going to attack the process as somehow somehow partisan, even though impeachment is a partisan exercise. It just is. It's a political determination.
Yeah, right. It's if you criticize Donald Trump, you're not on Donald Trump's team, and if you're not on Donald Trump's team, your criticism can't be taken seriously.
Exactly.
That's it. That's the
one,
whole
two,
thing,
three.
and that's the game they're playing at the end of the day here with the counting the votes, right? It's like I keep thinking about Justin Amash, right? So no one counts Justin Amash joining the Democrats as bipartisan because he was purged from the Republican Party.
Yep.
Yeah.
And he was purged from the Republican Party because he dared to criticize Donald Trump. So if you dare to criticize Donald Trump, you're a never Trumper, thus you're not taken seriously. The only people who are taken seriously are the people that are 100% on Team Trump. Now Donald Trump said last night on Twitter again, Republicans, don't be led into the fool's trap of saying it was not perfect, the call, but it is not impeachable. No, it is much stronger than that. Nothing was done wrong. So basically Donald Trump saying, I will warrant no criticism of me or you will be on the never Trump Democrat media side.
I will brook no dissent. It's also, but it is the only lesson that he has absorbed from his time in politics and in public life, which is if you show any weakness, if you admit to any faults, suddenly you're susceptible to political gravity. He's been like this from the beginning. He's been the roadrunner running across the ravine, and his message to Republicans over and over again is, if you don't look down, we'll make it to the other side. The second you look down, we'll all fall. And I don't know how wrong he is.
No, it's gotten him this far. I think the most telling piece of advice I've seen is Mitch McConnell is telling his members, reportedly, I think it was the Washington Post, that he's just saying calibrate your comments to fit your own politics. Like, just wait. Say as little as possible. Kevin McCarthy is saying lean in, full defense, get his back.
Full Brett Kavanaugh.
I just ask you guys, whose political judgment would you trust? Mitch McConnell or Kevin McCarthy?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's right. Like, Mitch McConnell is giving them better advice here.
As we say all the time here on Pod Save America,
always trust Mitch McConnell.
Tie your boat to the Mitch McConnell cruise line. I don't know. I don't know how to do boat metaphors.
I liked it.
I do think there's something interesting in both sides, Democrats and Donald Trump, saying over and over again, read the transcript. Because I do think it's telling of where Trump and the Republicans are trying to go to, right? Which is, it's not just, these allegations aren't true, they made them up, the process is bad. It's the evidence that is publicly available that they cannot refute. They are basically saying, just don't believe it's bad.
Yeah.
It's just not bad what you're doing, right? And so I do think one of the things that would help Democrats in these hearings, and I think we have to carry this case, is explain why this is an impeachable offense. Explain why it is, because and I heard Ezra Klein on his podcast talking about some poll they did where like a far too high a percentage of people said that presidents targeting political rivals is the usual course of business, right? And we've seen this in our polling, and we've seen this other places. Like, people think government is corrupt. People think politicians are corrupt on both sides, right? And we can argue that it's not true. We believe it's not true. We know it's not true. But this is what people believe. And so the hurdle here, not for the Republican base, they're fucking gone, right? Their minds are not going to change by this. But for independents and swing voters and everyone else is, why was this so unusual, and why does it rise to the level of an impeachable offense? What is the dangers of the President of the United States being able to bully a foreign government into interfering in the election? It seems pretty obvious, but we got to
I think that's why
remind people of that.
Yovanovitch is so important. I also, just back to the transcript point, I do think it's worth unpacking a little bit the difference between what it means when Democrats say go to the transcript and what Trump means. What Democrats mean is the evidence is as plain as their plain could be. The proof is here. We all know it. The Republicans know it. The media knows it. We all know it. When Trump says read the transcript, it's a bluff. He is saying read the transcript to people who won't, right? He's saying basically, I know that there's two kinds of people. There's my backers who will read the transcripts and then lie to the audience, and there are people that read the transcript as evidence that in the actual materials, there's exculpatory facts. There's proof that he really didn't do anything, that it's all a big hoax. And I will go to Sean Hannity and I will go to others and they will explain to me what's going on here. And they will surely say the same, that the people I trust who look at the transcripts will give it to me straight. And they will tell me that Donald Trump did nothing wrong. It's It is one is trying to get people to understand the truth, and the other is relying on a media echo chamber, a propaganda apparatus to lie to people who do not have the time or wherewithal to read hundreds of pages of transcript, which is the vast majority of people.
Yeah, I mean, but it does go back to, Donald Trump's belief here, or what he keeps saying, that one of the reasons the transcript wasn't problematic for him is that Joe Biden and Hunter Biden engaged in some sort of corrupt activity in Ukraine. And I do think these three witnesses this week will be helpful in proving that, again, we've said this a million times, Joe Biden was carrying out the foreign policy of the United States, the foreign policy of the European Union, and basically the entire world. By the way, the bipartisan foreign policy of the United States, Republicans wanted this too, in asking Ukraine to fire this prosecutor who everyone in the world believed was corrupt, except for the prosecutor. And maybe the prosecutor believed it too. And that by firing that prosecutor, again, Joe Biden was increasing the chances that the new prosecutor would investigate his son's company.
Yeah, Democrats are battling the Republican Party. We're battling cynicism generally, that we think all politicians are scum. And we are battling the right-wing Fox News, Rupert Murdoch media infrastructure. Ben Rhodes and I talked to former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd for Pod Save the World this week. And he was talking about how politics in the U.S., the U.K., and Australia are some of the most fucked up these days. And wouldn't you know it, Murdoch has huge media footprint in all of those places. So,
yeah, no, and again, and our polling showed this. We talked about this last week. No one should expect any Republicans to change their mind over the course of these hearings, right? Like and not only that, we should expect that Donald Trump's base will probably rally around him even more than they were before. I mean, we saw it in our polling. Like, impeachment is doing more than anything else is making the environment even more polarized than it already has been. You've got like 94% of Democrats and Democratic-leaning independents who are for it, and 94% of Republicans and Republican-leaning independents against it. That's where we are, and I don't expect that to change all that much. All right, let's talk about 2020. Just when we all thought the field of Democratic candidates was finally winnowing, we found out on Thursday that former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg might enter the primary after he already declared in March that he wouldn't run. Bloomberg, who's worth over $50 billion, would self-fund his campaign and skip the first 4 primary states of Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina to focus on the Super Tuesday states in early March. Let's start with this. Why do we think that Bloomberg changed his mind?
So I was really thinking about that. I was thinking about what has changed? What is he noticing in this field that would lead him to reach a different conclusion than he otherwise reached? And we should start by saying that, like, he's not Howard Schultz. He's running in the Democratic primary, right? So he's making a decision to say, I'm going to try to fight for my ideas within the coalition that will determine who faces Donald Trump. And
in fact, he's promised not to run as an independent third-party candidate, so good for him.
Good for him. But I was honestly struggling to understand how he could see that there's an opening. I find it really confusing if he thinks he can win. I find it less confusing if he thinks that there's an important point of view that needs to be represented. Because I was thinking, like, what's missing here? And I was thinking about what's made some of the debates very frustrating. And I think what it is that we see a lot of people talking at cross purposes. I think we see, like, a lot of very specific debates serving as kind of watchwords for ideology without having a larger ideological conversation. And we end up with candidates talking past each other. So Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders defend Medicare for all as the bold and brave and morally courageous and right thing to do. And then it's attacked as costing too much, or Biden has a kind of goes to a refrain that's a bit passive aggressive about how it's throwing out Obamacare and not particularly honest either. And then I think you have a whole bunch of other candidates who have been, I think, for a variety of reasons, afraid to articulate an ideological alternative. They will argue against Elizabeth Warren, they will argue against Bernie Sanders, but they understand that there's a political price they're not willing to pay to actually come out and say whatever they believe, whether it's that Medicare for all is unachievable or too far to the left, whether it's the fact that, decriminalizing the border isn't the right thing to do, whatever the position is, we've seen a real fear on the part of other Democrats to articulate a center-left consensus-building approach. And Pete has tried to do something like that without actually articulating an ideological vision. I think Kamala's been afraid to do that. Cory Booker's been afraid to do that. The only one who has, I think, articulated a version of what Bloomberg would argue for is Amy Klobuchar, and she's at 2 or 3% nationally and 4 or 5% in Iowa.
What do you think? Why do you think he changed his mind?
I mean, I think that there's a lot of folks who are counting on Biden to be their representative of more moderate place in this primary. And I think there's probably a lot of people who see Elizabeth Warren's rise as troubling for a lot of reasons. You could argue maybe if you're a billionaire that you're worried about the wealth tax. You could just argue that it's coming from a better place, which is he's worried she can't win. I don't really know. My gut reaction to anyone jumping in the race at this late stage is to feel a little bit frustrated. I think we have some great candidates. Some have some real weaknesses, but I wish everyone had just done this a little earlier. I also think that I'm a little frustrated that Steyer and Bloomberg can only do this because they have so much money.
Yeah.
And I think that's sort of a terrible story about our politics and the party. But, look, we should all wait and see if he actually gets in. Some recent polling suggests that it will be very difficult for him. Bloomberg is also floating a strategy of skipping the 4 early states, which I guess means just shitloads of ads to get you delegates on Super Tuesday, which seems difficult. I also think there's no way he's getting in the November debate. To get into the December debate, he needs 200,000 donors and a bunch of 4% in 4 polls or more, or 2 in an early state showing 6%, which is challenging. But look, stepping back, Mike Bloomberg has put a ton of money in support of ads for the party. He's been good on climate change. He's been good on guns. So I'm not going to jump on him yet, but I'm curious to see where this goes.
Yeah, look, I mean, I've said this before, the emotion that is driving this entire election on the Democratic side is fear that Donald Trump is going to win. And Mike Bloomberg and enough other people, and Mike Bloomberg being very wealthy and running a very large operation there, does a lot of polling and is worried that Joe Biden is not going to be able to win. Partly not because of his stances, but because we've all seen him in debates not be so strong, and so we've had the same worry ourselves about Joe Biden. He's worried about Elizabeth Warren because we have over recent weeks really talked ourselves all into believing that Medicare for all is the be all and end all, and it's going to be poison in a general election. Which, as we've talked about, there's polling that does show that it can be a challenge, but I think it's overstated what a challenge it is. But again, that's one of his concerns, and I think he thinks Bernie Sanders is in that crew, obviously, as well. He's also just very fiscally conservative and doesn't want either of those people to win, right? And I think, Pete Buttigieg, who's been rising in the polls, also might have some, they look at that and they say, well, he doesn't have as much experience and he's having trouble with voters of color, though I don't know that Mike Bloomberg has an easier time with voters of color either. So those are all the reasons, right? So it's weird. On one hand, I sort of get people looking at the field and having some measure of anxiety about winning. We all have it, let's be honest, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if we have candidates who we believe can win, we still have that anxiety. So I get that. The answer to the anxiety for all these people is I'm going to jump in, that part I don't get as much. It's why are you, I get your anxiety. Why are you the answer?
Well, it's interesting though. I'm just trying to find a way to make sense of it.
Yeah.
And I think Biden has been I think Biden has been too inarticulate to defend a kind of center-left consensus-building, practical kind of governing, and Mayor Pete has been too articulate to do it because he understands that that's just not where the mindset of voters is right now, even as he's trying to strike a balance between kind of talking about pragmatism, talking about unity without seeming like a wet blanket, raining on the kind of bold progressive vision. And what that means is, and then I think a bunch of other candidates are afraid to have an ideology at all and are kind of been all over the place. And so I do think that no one has been on that stage just sort of being unabashedly moderate, or a few of them, or maybe you've had them come and go. Bullock came and went. Delaney came and went, didn't do a good job of it. So I kind of understand someone who believes in that worldview not seeing it faithfully represented. That said, what is the harm of it being represented and maybe being rejected? I don't really know. What is the value of it? I don't really know. But I guess that to me, 30,000-foot view is, I think, what someone like Bloomberg would see as missing. Someone smartly articulating his worldview.
Yeah, I just think Bloomberg probably has a better claim or better answer to the question, why you, than some of the others, right? He ran the biggest city in the country. I think it's a little harder for a Steyer or some of these others.
Yeah, I do think, we've done this with all the other candidates, so strengths and weaknesses. On the strength side for Bloomberg, money, because it does cost quite a bit of money, and also it would be like he against Donald Trump. There would be unlimited cash that he could have,
and like a ready-made team.
And a ready-made team. Name ID, people know him. He's a record as a politician who was elected 3 times and a businessman. He's done quite a bit of work electing Democrats, fighting climate change, trying to pass gun control. Weaknesses. He's 77, right? Doesn't really solve any kind of age problem.
In billionaire years, though, that's a normie 62.
He has had some extremely controversial and I would say bad policies as mayor, like stop and frisk, which was ruled unconstitutional because it was targeting people of color. He's had some pretty problematic statements about women and the Me Too movement.
Yep.
He is fiscally conservative. And look, there's been a lot of attention on how he doesn't like the wealth tax, but he's fiscally conservative. Like when Bill de Blasio proposed an income tax surcharge on people making over $500,000 a year in New York, and he said it was the worst idea he'd ever heard of, right? Like he's not just like some of these other moderate Democrats who are like, I'm going to repeal the Trump tax cuts and raise taxes. I just don't want to go as far as the wealth tax. Like he's fiscally conservative. And I do wonder what the constituency is in the Democratic Party or the country for someone who on one hand has a policy like, I'm going to take away your soda, on the other hand, but I don't want to raise taxes on rich people.
Well,
like it's a pretty narrow constituency.
We know right. Sort of socially liberal, fiscally conservative people are very popular on the kind of
Morning Joe set?
on the kind of elite media conference circuit. They are less extant in the rest of the country.
I think like Bloomberg has to bet. I think that if Bloomberg enters and gets through this primary, then he will have succeeded in making an electability case for himself more than he will have had a conversation about any of these other policy areas, Medicare for all or anything else. And I think that would be my bet if I were him.
Yeah. And it does, like you said, Tommy, it does sort of just bum me out in general about our campaign finance system that, there's plenty of other moderate candidates out there and your Michael Bennetts, your Steve Bullocks. And like, if they had $50 billion, maybe they'd probably get more attention. Not like the poor moderates, but just like the fact that and Tom Steyer is pretty progressive, right? But like the fact that Tom Steyer and Michael Bloomberg are in this race and getting attention purely because they were successful in life, which great for them for being successful. But it's like that success then buys you political power, right? Like I know that's not a new thing, but it just bums you out.
Tom Steyer is able to be a part of the debates because he ran, I think, $50 million worth of ads.
Yeah.
Yeah,
and it's just like that's and he it boosted himself in the polls a little bit.
It did, and I will say though, it's also it's both Steyer and Bloomberg have another problem, which is they've kind of they can use their finances to get into the debate. But then, of course, once they're on that debate stage, they will find that their position is very well represented. Tom Steyer sounds a lot like Elizabeth Warren, and his case is you want Elizabeth Warren's policies, but coming from the mouth of a male billionaire, come out and say it. But of course, he won't. He just kind of articulates a similar vision. Mike Bloomberg's positions are well represented, I think, by Amy Klobuchar and several others who have not been able to make it onto the debate stage. So it's a bit frustrating that he wouldn't view this as an opportunity to help boost one of the people that shares his worldview as opposed to thinking he has to solve it himself.
Yeah, that's right.
It will unite all the other candidates around attacking him, though.
We literally already had a New York mayor in this race, and now he's gone.
Already have a billionaire, already have a New York mayor.
Yeah.
All right. When we come back, go ahead.
One thing before we go. So the interview with Paul. One thing before we just go to the interview. Today's Veterans Day, and a personal privilege here. I would just want to recommend that everyone read an amazing New York Magazine piece by someone we used to work with named Terry Zuplat. Yeah. The article is "The Endless Recovery from the Endless War." It's about Corey Remsburg, who a lot of you probably remember from the State of the Union speech when Obama lifted up his story and there was a 2-minute ovation. But it's an incredible piece about there's no Hollywood recovery from a traumatic brain injury. It is a decade of struggling and challenge, and it's an incredibly well done, poignant piece. And Terry's a great person, and Corey Remsburg is an American hero, and everyone should read it.
Yes, second that for sure.
Well, I should third it. I'm not going to sit here and be not thirding it. Don't read it, in my view. Counterpoint.
When we come back, we will have Tommy's interview with Paul Rykov.
Oh yeah, Andrew. Exit.
Thanks to Paul Rykov for joining us today, and we'll see you guys bright and early on Wednesday morning in our Slack channel if you want to see that, and then Dan and I will be doing a pod on Thursday.
What time is this hearing starting on Wednesday?
Starts at 10 a.m. Eastern, so 7 a.m. our time.
Are you fucking kidding me?
Yeah, it's gonna be tough for you.
God damn it, Schiff. God damn it.
Someone wake Lovett up.
Nadler wouldn't stand for this. Nadler's not a morning person. End of pod.